Shepherd, show me how to go o'er the hillside steep, how to gather, how to sow, how to feed thy sheep. I will listen for thy voice, lest my footsteps stray. I will follow and rejoice all the rugged way. Thou wilt bind the stubborn will, wound the callous breast, make self-righteousness be still, break earth's stupid rest. Strangers on a barren shore, laboring long and long, we would enter by the door, and thou knowest thine own. So when day grows dark and cold, tear or triumph harms, lead thy lambkins to the fold, take them in thine arms, feed the hungry, heal the heart, till the morning's beam. White as wool ere they depart, Shepherd, wash them clean.
Well, hello there, everybody. Hello, hello, hello. So nice to see everyone. I am so happy to be here. We are streaming live on Facebook, so welcome to all the Facebook visitors as well. And of course, the people who have come into the Zoom room as my VIPs. I just love you all so much. You're my regulars, so thank you. And those of you on Facebook maybe as well. So I just want to say welcome. Thank you for being here. This subject is one of my absolute favorites ever, because I truly believe that we have a choice always, whether we tune into what God's telling us or what the material senses are telling us. And my company is actually called This Choice Matters, because I believe that this choice matters so much. It has completely changed my life. I have my whole life followed the voice of God, and it's changed my life. I have relied on it for so many different things, truly every area of my life. And we'll get into the details of that. So today, I want to just kind of lay the groundwork a little bit. My prayer is that you hear what you need to hear being here, that you get the sense of being able for you to individually tune into what does spiritual intuition tell you, so that you know and can rely on that spiritual intuition. I know many of you have a daily practice, a daily spiritual practice, and you're already very involved in metaphysics and spirituality and listening to what God has to say. But my prayer is that this will give you a little bit of new insight, or at least review some of the things that you think about it and maybe look at it in new and different ways, so that you feel confident that at any moment in your life, you can tune in to what God is saying, to your spiritual intuition, the individual voice that's speaking to you, and you can hear it clearly, you can rely on it, you can feel confident in following whatever it's leading you to do. There are so many experiences I want to share with you. Okay, so that's what we're doing. And I'm going to just lay out a little bit of what that looks like from my perspective. And please know that I'm sharing this from my perspective and from my life. You may have a different experience. I talk in terms of God. You may not talk in terms of God. You may talk in terms of universe or source, or your highest sense of yourself, or that still small voice inside of you, or gut instinct. Whatever terms you use and you're comfortable with, just plug them in. This is in no way, shape, or form trying to convince you to think about it in the same way that I do. I just share it from my heart in the hopes that it can serve you. So I'm going to look at it from the standpoint of God. So when I say hearing God's voice, if I don't know who God is, I'm not going to be able to hear his voice. Kind of like the sheep know their shepherd, right? So we'll be looking a little bit about what is God's voice? What does that sound like? And then how does that get translated to us? I like to think of them as angels, and sort of what are angels? What are those spiritual intuitions? And then what can we do to be more present to that voice of God? Is there stuff that we can do so that we can hear God's voice in a more clear way? So we'll be looking at those things, and I'll be sharing lots of little stories along the way. But the first, and I am showing the quotes that I'm sharing. I'm going to try to share on screen. We'll see how that goes. If it falls apart, okay, we'll all just roll with it. But I'm going to see how well I can do with that. So bear with me. So as we all live here, and we're all experiencing this sort of 3D experience on planet Earth, we all know that it's illusion. Einstein told us it's an illusion. Quantum physicists are telling us now it's an illusion. We all know that. But we are kind of experiencing this with our perception at this point. So we are all here, walking around in these little spacesuits. And there is a shepherd. There is a universal shepherd that is guiding all of his little sheep. I like to think of myself as a little sheep. So I want to share a quote with you that actually speaks to that. So let me see how this goes. One moment. I'm going to go to the next slide. So God is universal. The power of God is universal. It's confined to no spot, defined by no dogma, appropriated by no sect or religion or whatever, not more to one than all. God is our shepherd. He guards us, he guides us, he feeds us, he folds the sheep of his pasture. And their ears are attuned, so our ears are attuned to his call. In the words of the loving disciple, my sheep hear my voice and they follow me, neither shall any man pluck them out of my hand. So what I know to be true, is that God's voice is heard by all. Whether you call it God or something else, God's voice is available and heard by all. You don't have to be a particular religion or thought, way of thinking or way of practicing. God's voice is available. So that's kind of the basis of this, that everyone, no matter where you are on planet Earth or not, if you're somewhere else, okay, no matter where you are, you can hear God's voice. It's not restricted by time or place or condition. You don't have to be in a particular, I don't know, financial level or personal level or spiritual level. None of that matters. You can always hear God's voice. Like I said before, I think of that in terms of angels. I think of God's voice as being angels. And I've studied all my life these scientific spiritual laws discovered by a woman called Mary Baker Eddy. She discovered something called Christian Science. She calls Christian Science the law of God, the law of good, interpreting and demonstrating the divine principle and rule of universal harmony. So these spiritual laws that I've studied my whole life, and I know a lot of you have as well, or if it hasn't been in terms of Christian Science, you've studied spiritual law in other religions or other ways of studying spirituality. It doesn't have to be called Christian Science. The science of these laws is universal, just as God is universal and God's goodness is universal. So that law of God, that law of good that was discovered by Mary Baker Eddy, she wrote a textbook of these spiritual laws called Science and Health with Key to the Scriptures. And in that book, there are so many wise statements about what we're talking about today. So I wanted to just share something with you around that. Angels. Well, we know from the Bible in the 91st Psalm, for he shall give his angels charge over thee to keep thee in all thy ways. Well, if we know that's true, and we know that angels will protect us, will guide us, will guard us, will keep us safe, what are those angels? Well, Mrs. Eddy says angels are God's thoughts passing to man, spiritual intuitions, pure and perfect, the inspiration of goodness, purity, and immortality, counteracting all evil, sensuality, and mortality. She also says angels are pure thoughts from God, winged with truth and love, no matter what their individualism may be. Angels are God's representatives. So when we think in terms of angels, we think in terms of spiritual intuition coming to us. Well, what does that feel like? If we have a spiritual intuition, what does that feel like? I can share a little story. A lot of you have heard the story. Some of you may not have, but I'm going to give you the Reader's Digest version. There is an instance when I was studying for finals in college. I heard an angel thought, go to the infirmary. I wasn't sick. I ended up arguing with the angel at first and then realizing, okay, this is an angel thought. I really do want to be obedient to whatever angel thoughts come to me. And I'd made a deal with God very early on that I would always do that. And I thought, okay, it doesn't make sense, but I'm doing it anyway. And I walked clear across campus, as I was at college at the time, studying for finals. It's like 20-minute walk across campus in the snow, cold. It's 2:30 in the morning by the time I get to the infirmary. And I stand at the door, and there's a sign on the door that says door locked at 11. And I stand there and I argue with the angels. I'm not ringing the buzzer, not doing it. And I hear another intuition, another voice, try the doorknob. So I thought, okay, I'll try the doorknob. And I open the door and I walk in, and it's dark, but I hear crying kind of in the distance. So I follow through the hallways. I go follow the crying back to the back of this building. And I get back to the kitchen, and there in the kitchen is a nurse, the only one who was there. And she's on the floor having a really hard time. And she looks up at me with tears in her eyes. I get choked up every time I tell this story. She looks up at me and she says, "How did you know to come? I've been praying that somebody would come and help me." I was able to help her and everything worked out. But when you have an experience like that, that clearly I had no intention of going to the infirmary. Clearly, this was an intuition from God that came to me. She had been praying that someone would help her. I got the memo. If I had not been available to that spiritual intuition, hopefully somebody else would have been, but I was at that point, and I listened to that intuition and was able to help somebody, was able to support someone who had actually had a wonderful healing as a result of that. When you have experiences like that, and I know many of you have had the same kinds of experiences, you don't doubt that when you hear that spiritual intuition, it's guiding you in the right way. What did Mrs. Eddy say in the quote that I just shared before? That the inspiration of goodness, purity, and immortality is counteracting all evil, sensuality, and mortality. It's goodness, purity, and immortality. That's what those thoughts are bringing to us. Those angel thoughts are bringing up goodness and purity and immortality, and what is supporting that. So there's another instance where I was driving down a street, a very curvy street in Los Angeles called Mulholland Drive, and was driving about as fast as you could drive on that road because I knew it very well, and I was kind of cruising along, and I heard slow down really loudly in my thought, and I hit the brakes right away. And as soon as I did that, coming around this blind corner was a truck across the yellow line coming right at me, like head-on collision kind of right at me. He veered just in time and got back on his side of the road. But if I had not slowed down, that would have been a head-on collision, no question. So this spiritual intuition that you hear will guide you to safety. It will guide you to something better, to something closer to immortality and goodness. I want to share another quote with you. So Mrs. Eddy says, when angels visit us, we know their presence by the love they create in our hearts. It is a spiritual idea that lights your path. The psalmist said, he shall give his angels charge over thee. Well, God gives you his spiritual ideas, and in turn, they give you daily supplies. Never ask for tomorrow. It is enough that divine love is an ever-present help. And if you wait, never doubting, you will have all you need every moment. So I want to share another story with you. We will have all we need every moment. Well, I was every job I've ever gotten, every place I've ever worked I've been guided to the work that I've been doing. My very first job out of college, actually it happened even before that, but my very first job out of college, I was guided to interact with certain people that then gave me opportunities and offered me jobs. I was guided to shift jobs from one place to another, get on the elevator at just the right time and run into just the right person. Things that looked like coincidences, but weren't, because as I listened to those spiritual intuitions and followed them, and that is key, when you start getting used to what do those intuitions sound like to me? Like a lot of times I'll hear a voice, sometimes I'll just get a feeling or just a knowing. And what I invite you to do is get to know what God's voice sounds like to you. It may not sound like a voice in your head. It may just be that calm knowing inside of you. It may be that place where you just, a thought keeps occurring to you, or a thought just gently keeps coming back to you. We're going to talk a little bit later about the consistency of the style of thought that comes. It's not, it doesn't create fear. It creates calm. There's just a knowing about it. So I invite you to just be very aware and alert and observe, what do those spiritual intuitions sound like to you? How do they present themselves to you? Because it is completely individual to you. And that's what the Christ is, right? The Christ is that true idea voicing good. This is a quote from Mrs. Eddy as well. The true idea voicing good, the divine message from God to men, speaking to the human consciousness. So how it's being communicated to you is completely yours, nobody else's. And you don't need to tell anybody else. I mean, I'm sharing stories because I just want to illustrate it's happened so many times. There's actually a list that I want to grab off to the side here that I made to talk to you about the fact that, okay, so I made this list, and these are the different arenas in which I have had so many different experiences. Safety, my safety and others. Location, like where do I live? Where is something located when I lose stuff, location of stuff. Supply, jobs, ideas, inspiration. Care, feeling loved, feeling cared for, feeling supported emotionally, physically. Companionship, I have a couple stories to tell you about that. Service, like when I can be in service to others. I just shared one about going to help the nurse. Fulfillment of purpose, when I've been guided towards activities that I wasn't quite sure were right for me, but I had an intuition that I needed to pursue it anyway, and then ultimately realize this is exactly what I needed to be involved in, that gave me that sense of fulfillment, that I'm really, truly fulfilling my purpose and being the manifestation of God that I have been made to be. And mental and physical healing, all sorts of experiences. So I wanted to tell you one about let me just pick one. I'll do the companionship one, because I think a lot of people, particularly after what we've been through in the last couple of years, a lot of people have felt very alone. And there was a time in my life when I felt truly alone, and I really wanted to feel more companion with other people, a sense of companionship. And in high school, because I was a bit of an odd duck, a lot of people were not sort of spiritually oriented, or at least didn't talk about it. They probably were, but just weren't talking about it. I was pretty outward in talking about my spirituality and the fact that I was a little different than a lot of people because I didn't go to doctors and I relied on prayer for healing rather than going to, not that there's anything wrong with going to a doctor. My grandfather was a surgeon. So I grew up, a lot of you know, I grew up in a household where both practices were definitely available. And I always chose God and prayer because it always worked. I never went to a doctor, still have not gone to a doctor. So I always looked in terms of companionship. I always turned to God for what does that look like? So going to college, and you know, you're there, you're new, there's all these new people. I thought, okay, God, like guide me to the friends that I need to be with. Guide me to my tribe. Who can I go bless and who can bless me, and let's have companionship. So in one of the very first events at college was this kind of group, sort of everybody get to know each other. And I got this very clear sense. There was a girl across the room, all far on the other side of the room, and I just kind of saw her, and I got this really clear sense that I needed to walk over and introduce myself. And I needed to just go, and I asked her kind of an odd question, but I walked over and introduced myself, and we ended up becoming best friends and remain best friends now. So that's, you know, many, many years ago. The same thing happened with another friend when that particular friend was working in Europe and I was by myself and didn't have that kind of day-to-day connection. I thought, well, God, okay, God, you know, let me be a blessing to somebody else and let me find companionship in that way. And some of you know this kind of odd story. And I ended up at an event that I wouldn't normally go to, but it just felt right to go. Like, it's that spiritual intuition, that it's like that thought that comes to you all along the process. Are you listening for God's voice? Are you tuning into, you know, this is something you need to go do, even if it doesn't make sense. And going to this particular event didn't make sense. I found myself walking next to another woman, and a question came to me that I needed to ask her. And I thought, okay, this is really odd. And the question was, if you believed it strongly enough, don't you think we could just lift off and fly right now? And the question came to me, and I thought, really? I'm going to ask her that? She's going to think I'm nuts. Are you kidding me? Ask her the question. It's like, okay. So I got bold and I asked her the question. And that's a quality that I want you to notice. The boldness of my walking across the room to talk to the girl in college, the boldness of asking this question that seemed really bizarre, like, really? I asked her the question, and her response was, uh-huh. And we just kept walking in silence. Well, she has become a best friend. And that was many, many, many years, like, I don't know, 30 years ago. And so those little instances that may seem like odd or seem like, nah, I don't want to do that. Follow those, because there are gifts at the other end of that. There are major gifts at the other end of that. Okay, I'm going to share another quote with you because it goes kind of right along with what we're saying here. And thine ear shall hear a word behind thee saying, this is the way, walk ye in it, when you turn to the right and when you turn to the left. So when we are sitting and not knowing which way to go, we can rely very directly on the fact that you will hear what God is saying. You will be guided. This is the way, walk ye in it, when you turn to the right and when you turn to the left. That there is a very definite guidance going on. It's like that internal GPS that is God-derived and God-driven, and it is guiding you every step of the way. Mrs. Eddy says, ears are not organs of the so-called corporeal senses, but spiritual understanding. So if thine ears hear the word behind thee, what is it that's actually hearing? It's our spiritual understanding that's hearing. Jesus said, referring to spiritual perception, having ears hear ye not. So even Jesus was saying, it's not about your physical ears. It's about spiritually understanding the truth of your being based in God, spiritually understanding that God created you. And because God created you, and you are the expression of God as God's reflection, you have what you need. Before I was born, the Lord called me. Well, what does that mean? It means that before you were even conceived of, God had a plan for you. Before you even were a spiritual idea, because that spiritual idea is in eternity, there's no beginning or end. Before what seems like a beginning, you'd already been created and you'd already been called. And that means if you've already been called, then you can already hear the voice of God. So that's built into who you are. It's built into the very nature of your being, that you can hear the voice of God. It's not something that you have to go out and get. You already have it. Behold, I stand at the door and knock. If any man hear my voice and open the door, I will come into him and will sup with him and he with me. That's a promise that Jesus gave us. That's a promise that if we open the door, if we allow that Christ message to come into consciousness, if we allow ourselves to be alert and hear the spiritual intuition, it will guide us. It will be with us always, so that in every moment, like when I was driving on Mulholland, and the truck was coming around the corner, I wasn't particularly thinking about spiritual things or worried about what was happening in the world, or like I was just going to work. And the voice cut through whatever it was I was thinking about. I honestly can't tell you. And in that moment, I got the idea that I needed in the instant that I needed it. There was no delay. There was no question, because it was loud and it was insistent. So it came in a way that communicated to me the urgency of it. It's not something I had to figure out, interpret, question. It was absolutely clear. So one of the things that we can be certain of is that when we hear God's voice, it is telling us exactly what we need when we need it, and we can trust it. If it comes to you and it's urgent, then act promptly. Don't wait. Definitely act promptly. So I want to tell you a couple of stories about when I heard a voice, and we're getting a little bit into what does it look like? What does the practice of this look like? So I want you to sort of notice the kinds of things that were happening when I was involved in these things. So I'm going to share a couple of stories, and I'm just going to share this so that you can see. So we were looking for a place to live, my husband and I, and we were pretty new to Boston together, and we're looking for a condo. We had looked at everything on the market in the vicinity that we wanted to see, and nothing. And we've been working with this really wonderful real estate agent. So we finally got to the place where we kind of dropped all the human ways and means of doing things, and we turned it over to God. And we sat and we listed out all the different spiritual qualities that we wanted in a home. And we yielded to the spiritual nature of home. We yielded our thought to what that looked like for us and what were those qualities for us. And we both agreed that we would sit quietly and we would turn it over to God and say, okay, God, we're listening. You tell us what we need to do at this point. We've done everything humanly possible. We're turning it over to you. And as soon as we did that, like within 30 seconds, the phone rang, and it was our realtor. And he said, hey, I just found out about this thing coming on the market. It's not on the market yet, but it's about to. It's absolutely perfect. It fulfills all of the things that you've wanted in a home. Let me show it to you. I think this is your place. And it was a condo. We bought it, and it was a great place to have. The same thing happened to us when we moved to LA. We were renting a home, and the owner of the home said, you know, I'm going to sell this. I need you guys to move out. So we started looking at places to buy. And we looked again at everything on the market. And again, we got to a point where we finally sat down together and we turned it over to God. And we said, okay, God, we need to hear you govern this. We need to hear your voice here. And we yielded to that. We also were very particular in asking specifically, what is the right amount for us to spend on a place? What's the right amount? And we came up with an amount. We listened to what that amount would be. We actually both wrote an amount down on a piece of paper, and then it was like the same amount within a few $100s. And then we listened and said, okay, God, we're listening. And again, like honestly, within 30 seconds, the phone rang. And it was the owner of the house. And she said, you know, I really like you guys. I know you love this home. What do you say I sell this to you for what I owe the bank? And oh, by the way, I have this friend who's a real estate agent who can do the deal for us. So, and then the amount that she was asking for it was not within thousands of what we said, not within hundreds of thousands of what we said. It was within hundreds of dollars of the number that we had written down as being appropriate to what we needed to spend. That's just two of the homes that we've been in together. It's happened in every single place that I've lived. When I first moved to Boston, I got a call. I turned it over to God, the same kind of thing. Got a call from a friend who I knew from AU, from this youth group I'd been in. Hadn't talked to her in years. She called me out of the blue and said, hey, I need a roommate. Do you want to come in? Sight unseen, I knew it was the right place. And it was an apartment I had for years. There's another instance where I want to talk, and I don't need to sort of keep sharing the screen, but I'm going to share two instances when it comes to work that were exactly the same kind of thing. And there's a pattern here. I'm sharing these with you because there's definitely a pattern here. When I first started working for doing spiritual work, like what I'm doing now as a spiritual practitioner, I had several clients, and I was kind of on the floor on my knees and reaching out to God saying, God, what do you want me to do? You know, I'm feeling like I'm at a crossroads in my work. Do you want me to go work somewhere? Because I had several people sort of saying, hey, you need to go get a job kind of thing. I was on my knees in my office, just turning it over to God, just saying, God, I'm listening. What would you have me do? The phone rang. There's a lot of the phone ringing when I turn things over to God. There's a pattern here. And it was the headmaster at a school. And he said, I just had somebody at the front desk walk out. They're not coming back. Can you start full-time tomorrow? Because I'd been subbing there, so he knew me and I knew that job. And I said, let me ask God. Let me clear my decks with my clients. Let me see if this is possible. And it seemed like a right idea. And I did that. And I ended up working there in many different jobs for about 20 years. And at the other end of that 20 years, the same thing happened. I was feeling like I just had that spiritual intuition. It's time to move on. It's time to move on. And there wasn't a clear answer. So again, I got to the place where I just like was crying uncle, like yielding to God. What would you have me do? Where would you have me go? What would you have me say and to whom? Who would you have me be right now? How can I serve you? There's a lot of service in this. And I was on the floor. There's a lot of being on the floor too. I was on the floor praying and said, okay, God, you know, what would you have me do? What's the right idea here? And I heard a very clear, very loud, very masculine at that point, voice that said, "You work for me." And I thought, all righty then. Okay, God, since I work for you, then you work it out. If I need to leave this job, you work it out. Because I'd been like back and forth for several months trying to figure out, how do I extricate myself and serve them and not leave them in a lurch and pursue what I need to pursue. Like, I was really feeling called to do this kind of work. Within 24 hours of hearing "you work for me," the job itself was discontinued. And I was told that my job was done at the end of the month. So 3 weeks later, I had no job. It didn't exist anymore. So it got worked out really quickly when I turned it over to God. When I stopped mucking around, trying to control it, trying to make sure that it all worked out and all the human pieces were in place and everything was. I want to look at similar qualities in a lot of these experiences that I've had. And I know that when I share experiences that I've had, what I invite you to do is think about the experiences that you've had, because I know you've all had experiences where you felt guided by intuition, and look at the similar qualities that you've experienced when going through that. Now, I can say for mine, there's been this, there's a sense of stillness and a sense of silence where I get very still and very silent. And what I mean by silent is stopping the human chatter that's going on in our heads all the time. It's not our thinking, that human tape that's running all the time. My mind is the reflection of God, mind. So there's not a lot of human chatter in mind. There's knowing, there's stillness. So be present to the qualities that you're expressing when you are in tune with the divine. What does that look like? For me, it looks like calm. Oh, I'm going to just share this. I'll share the screen because maybe this will help you as well. One moment. So in stillness and silence, what does listening look like? For me, it's being very watchful. There's a sense of calm about it. There's a sense of joy where it's very kind of free from pressure. It's free from feeling like I need to, like this anxious sense of needing to solve something. It's free of all that. It's patient, meaning I'm just in a place of openness. I'm prepared to be in service. I'm trusting whatever voice is coming through that is clear. I'm in a place of humility and openness and willingness. And all of those qualities have been present when I've heard God's voice, when I've quieted that human sense of thinking and truly been open to, what is God saying? The ways of hearing for me, when I hear God's voice, there's no attachment to human circumstances. The voice is not emotional. There's no fear involved. There's no opinion. And I want to pause on that for just a moment. When we hear God's voice and we have an opinion about it, like when I heard God's voice when I was in college and heard the voice go to the infirmary, I had an opinion about it. And I had to work through my own opinion about that before I really heard the message, before I yielded to being obedient to God's voice, to that angel thought. There's no sense of thinking. When you hear God's voice, it's not like, I just thought this and it's my thinking. There's no doubt involved. There's really, truly a sense of just knowing, like I just know. There's a sense of presence, and it's very much in the present tense. There's no past or future in it. There's no time around it. It brings you a sense of peace. There's a feeling state around it that is peaceful, that is calm, that is clear, that is very simple and singular and very certain. And because all of those qualities are present in the midst of hearing God's voice, all of those qualities are there, it starts to be familiar to you. You start to recognize, oh, that's what it sounds like. Oh, that's what it feels like. Oh, okay, this is familiar to me. I know I can trust it. And why is that key? Because if you're in the flurry of doing your human walk and one of those thoughts floats through, you can be alert to it and pay attention to it and not just kind of not notice it. The night before the big LA earthquake in '94, I had two things happen. I was pregnant at the time, so I used to drink a lot of water. So I had a big glass of water that I would put by my nightstand because it was such a big glass. I thought, ooh, I really don't want it to spill. So I would put it into the shelf of my nightstand. It just fit, just in the shelf of my nightstand. And when I was putting that glass of water into my nightstand, that particular night, this little thought floated through. That water's going to get spilled. And I thought, no, it's not. It's sitting in the, like, it can't even tip. It's like in the shelf. It can't even budge. There's no way it's going to, no. But the thought came through in a very neutral, calm, just kind of knowing way. That's going to spill. When I was putting my lotion that I had just bought, I think I was buying Origin's lotion at the time, very expensive little bottle of lotion, face lotion, that I was putting in the medicine cabinet, the mirror cabinet, after I'd washed my face. I put it in the cabinet and was shutting the door. Little thought floated through. That's going to break. And I thought, what? Why? No, I'm putting it very securely in the thing, closing the little mirror cabinet. No, it's not going to break. But I had an opinion about that. I had an opinion about these thoughts that were just there. They were just present. They were very calm. There was no emotion attached to them. There was just this sort of knowingness about them. Well, the earthquake happened at 4:37 in the morning. I actually woke up before it came. I heard it coming and I thought, oh, like I was alert even to it coming. I heard it coming, the rumbling was coming and everything started shaking. And it's the one thing that they don't say about earthquakes is they're very, very loud. It's like a freight train going through your living room. It was very loud. And a lot of stuff fell over, a lot of stuff happened. But what's interesting is the two things that happened, the nightstand fell over, the water spilled everywhere, the mirror cabinet popped open, and that's the thing that broke. Nothing else broke. That's the thing that fell out and broke on the tile floor. I don't know. I just share that. So I want us all to really look at, what does it sound like to you? What does it feel like to you? And maybe write a list. Maybe review some of the experiences that you've had and write a list for yourself, what it is for you, so that when it comes in a subtle form, you notice it and you can be obedient to it. The fact that it's always there is great, but if we're not following it, it doesn't really do us much good. So there's another quote from another book that Mrs. Eddy wrote called Miscellany, where she says, "Today, if ye would hear his voice, listen to his word and serve no other gods, then the divine principle of good that we call God will be found an ever-present help in all things. If we tune in and if we honor God as the all-powerful, ever-present, omniscient good, and that's where our thought is. It's like all of this is going on all the time. God is ever present. Good is ever present. The divine knowing, the all-knowing mind is ever present. We are the manifestation of the all-knowing mind. So we do know all that we need to know. But if we're not tuning into that and we're not present to that in our own experience, it's not doing us much good. It's not going to be the ever-present help. It'll come crashing through because God is good and God is preserving us. When I was 6 and I was being tempted by all of my cousins to jump into the darkness in this castle, I was up in a little window and I was the littlest one, so I could jump in. And a voice in my head, against all of this, the sort of prompting of all the kids, jump, jump, jump. The voice in my head said, don't jump, don't jump. It saved me from a big problem because it was 2 stories down and a lot of broken glass at the bottom. And I didn't jump. But it's because something, I would suggest God, that angel voice was in my head saying, don't jump, protecting me, guiding me. When my husband and I did some rehab on our house, I was up on the roof. We had built a particular part that wasn't completely done yet, and there was a big rain coming, so we were draping tarps over this big opening in the house. And it's like a story and a half. I was like 14 feet up, I don't know, 15 feet up where the roof was. And he's at one end of this big opening, I'm at the other end, and I'm walking backwards, kind of stretching the tarp out, and something says, stop. My next step would have been off the roof. I was just kind of working on the tarp, focusing on the tarp, wasn't paying attention to that stop. I would have gone backwards off the roof, and that probably wouldn't have gone well. I mean, I'm sure we could have had healing, but I much prefer getting the memo and stopping. So many, many instances, there is the ability for us to tune in and be very present with God's voice and have fun with it. It can guide us to all sorts of wonderful things. But are we allowing that to have presence in our life? Are we allowing it to kind of bubble up and be the thing that we're tuning into? Or are we so busy in our sort of human experience doing things that we're not willing to just stop and pause and listen? Are we practicing listening? Well, let me just look at the clock for a second. I want to give us an opportunity right here, right now. Shock, horrors. We're actually going to do this. Okay, we're going to do this. I want to practice listening. I want us to all together sit and listen and see what that feels like. And I want you to notice a couple of things when we do this. When we go into silence, one of the things that will, I guarantee you, come up is that human chatter. Why am I doing this? What is this? Is like, well, this is pointless. Okay, I mean, you'll get those arguments, or you'll get the to-do list going, and the to-do list, like, this is Saturday, I'm sitting here in silence. Wait, really, really, really? There's that false sense of ego that tries to keep control of everything. And as long as we're yielding to that false ego and letting that run the show, and the false ego is just a belief in a separation from God, a belief that there could be some mind separate from God that's not tuned into the all-knowing, all-good, that there's some belief of something else. That's the falsity. That's the illusion. So when we go into silence in just a moment, I want you to just let that recede into the background and really tune into silence. Really tune into, does God have a message for me right now? Is there something that I can be aware of? Maybe, what am I doing right after this today? Who would you have me be? What would you have me do? Where would you have me go? What would you have me say, and to whom? Are you willing to be in service to the divine? Are you willing to tune into God, who's governing all good, and in every way is guiding us into more good and more spirituality and better experience? Are we willing to tune in and let that be what governs us? So let's bring it in for a couple minutes and just have silence and practice listening. So join me in practicing listening for just a couple minutes. So I wanted to stay still and quiet until I got to the same place that I'm asking you to get to. To get to that place of having audience with the divine. And what I truly feel for you is I just feel like I so have a desire that you feel so at one with the divine presence that you can feel that you can feel loved, that you can feel in tune with it to the point where you can trust it and you can lean on it and you can rely on it when you need to, and you have audience with it when it needs you to, when it's guiding you. So that is my prayer. That is my prayer for you, that you feel, that you truly feel loved and guarded and guided and cared for. And that when you go into silence, you can really feel that presence of the divine and hear God's voice speaking to you individually in whatever form you need. Because God is good, only all the time, as my friend Melanie Wilson would say, only all the time. So I invite you to, on those of you on Facebook, I invite you to have a blessed day and go off and really tune into God's voice. I hope you've gotten something out of this. If you are not on my mailing list, I have some things coming up in January. I just invite you to get on the mailing list and go to lisataylorcs.com and get on the mailing list. Those of you in the Zoom room, I look forward to chatting for just a little bit longer because we're all together and I really look forward to that. So those of you on Facebook, I will bid you adieu. Thank you so much for joining us here. Those of you on Zoom, stay put and we will continue in the Zoom room. So lots of love to you on Facebook and see you next time.